Hey everybody, Paul Mack here. I've got another viewer question. This one comes from Danny Ennis, 8126, and he says, "Hey Paul, I have land that is mainly sand. I live right by a large river. Any idea how I can cultivate it into a more fertile soil? I was thinking maybe having topsoil brought in and fertilizer, but unsure. Any help would be appreciated." Well, Danny, it seems like the two big soil problems people have when they're trying to start a garden or prepare a garden bed are the two extremes. Either they have too much sand in their soil like you have, or they have too much clay in their soil. Now, when we think of dirt, we think of that dark, brown, crumbly stuff under our feet when we're walking, and that stuff that our mama makes us wash off our hands when we're getting ready to eat, and the stuff that for some reason plants like to grow in. But dirt is actually composed of a lot of little things, little organisms. It's actually good soil, fertile soil is actually quite alive. Not the soil itself, but the things in the soil have life to them. They're little bitty organisms, many of which we can't see with the naked eye, and it's their byproducts that plants actually thrive in. It's not so much dead dirt that plants like. Plants wouldn't thrive in dirt that was completely dead and had none of those organisms in it. But again, it's the byproducts of these organisms in the dirt that plants thrive on. Now, pure clay and pure sand in and of themselves are dead things. There's no life in pure sand or pure clay. And they are polar opposites with opposite problems. And when you've got too much of either clay or too much sand in your soil, that's when problems arise. If you've got too much clay, then the water doesn't drain properly because clay is so much a tiny particle that it seals. It seals the ground and holds the water and keeps that water from draining on through. And so your soil is going to be too wet for many of the plants that we like to grow. The opposite is true of sandy soil. If there's too much sand in your soil, it's going to drain completely. It's not going to be able to hold hardly any water at all, depending on how sandy your soil is. And with no water, well, plants don't like that either. They don't like too much water and they don't like too little water. So that's why I say those are polar opposites. So back to Danny's original question, how can I cultivate my sandy soil, basically, into a more fertile soil? Well, I've got good news and I've got good news. Which do you want first? The good news. Okay. The good news is that either a sandy soil or a clay soil can be fixed. The other good news is that they're both fixed in the same way, and that is through the addition of materials that induce or propagate the behavior and the development of these little organisms, these living organisms that I talked about, which will get your soil back to a fertile condition. Now, Danny mentioned the question of bringing in topsoil as an option, which you certainly could do. Basically, you're just bringing in good dirt that has those organisms already in it. And you can do that. It's probably the expensive option to first of all find it and then hire somebody to dig it up and bring it to you in a dump truck, and then you probably have to spread it out yourself. It's an option, and it's a rather quick option, albeit you got to spend some money to do that. The other option, which is probably more doable for the common homesteader, the common farmer like ourselves, would involve time rather than money. And it involves the addition of materials to your dirt. The good news, well, the third good news, is that these materials can often be produced or found right on your farm with very little expense. The downside is it may take time, a little time, not a lot. We're talking a year or two before you begin seeing some progress, and that progress, albeit slow, the progress would be more steady and you'll have fertile soil, and it won't be, once you get it to a fertile stage where it's producing more and more good produce, the things you're trying to grow each year, it's not really hard to maintain that fertility if you're careful and you do sensible things about it. So what are these materials you can add to your soil? Well, historically, traditionally, these materials that you add to a soil, amendments is the modern term for it, I guess, have been called manures. M-A-N-U-R-E. You're familiar with that word. But when you think of manure these days in our modern terminology, when we talk about manure, most people think of the excretion of animals. In other words, the substance that comes out of a south end of a northbound mule as manure. But there are many other, historically, as I've said, there are many other types of manures, and not all of them animal excretion. To make it easier to think about, I've kind of come up with my own categories to help make this clear, and I've color-coded them. For instance, there's what I call the brown manures, and these are, what we typically think of, the excretions of animals, whether it be whatever kind of livestock. Rabbit manure is excellent. Chicken manure is very, very strong. You need to be very careful when you're using that. It can overpower a garden or plants very quickly. Horse. Any equine manure is probably among the best because of the horse's digestive system. Food tends to pass through very quickly, not as completely digested as in a cow who has 4 stomachs, which completely, and the cows and the hogs, I think that's more or less called the colder manures because they don't heat up. If you piled up a bunch of horse manure and then a week or so later in summertime, or winter really, stuck your hand in the middle of that pile of manure, which is an interesting experience, you're going to feel the very, very hot nature of the inside of that pile. It's a very high temperature. Almost feels like you're going to burn your hand. But if you stuck your hand inside a pile of cow manure, hog manure, it's not going to be that much fun. Neither one is that much fun. So those are the brown manures, the livestock excretions. And then we have what I like to call the golden manures, which are carbon-type materials that you can find around the farm, basically dead plant material. For instance, the main one, as far as I'm concerned, and the material that there is so much available here on my farm would be leaves from hardwood trees, oak leaves and so forth. And to rake those up and to put them on your garden, I usually do it about Thanksgiving time, between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and just let those leaves sit there, usually over brown manure, over a pile of cow manure or whatever I have available. Put those leaves on top and just let them sit there and cook all winter long. And by spring, you can part those leaves. Usually the leaves have deteriorated. Anyway, leaves are a good example of golden manure. Grass clippings. Those are very handy. Most people have a lawnmower and a yard, and grass clippings are great to add back to your soil. But again, these things take time to deteriorate. That's why I say this is an option that takes maybe a while to get your sandy or your clay soil less sandy or less clay. Other golden manures might be the debris from cutting wood. A lot of times I'll cut wood and throw it in the back of the truck, haul it to my wood pile, and when I'm through unloading the truck, there's this layer of debris in that truck that a lot of times I'll sweep off, and I might even mulch my apple trees with that debris. Basically, it's similar to wood chips, which is another gold manure. Maybe you have a tree trimming company that comes through your area from time to time, and they're trimming the brush and the trees under power lines. Just stop off. Usually they're nice folks. Offer them an iced tea or something and say, hey, can you dump that in my yard? A lot of times they're happy to do that. They're happy to look for a place nearby to get rid of all that stuff so that they can keep on working. And those wood chips are known to be really, they hold moisture, and as they're decaying, as long as it's not, cedar, you don't want a lot of cedar in that because cedar takes forever to decay. But if it's hardwood, basically, maybe some pine. Pine doesn't hurt anything. It's a little more acidic, but it's not that bad. Those are fine things to put over a garden area to begin encouraging those organisms, including the worms. The worms are the biggest, most visible of those organisms. I call them the king of that little kingdom, the microorganism kingdom. And then thirdly, the next color is the green manures. You probably are aware of what green manures are. That's when you sow some seed on a plot, and the thing that you're growing, whether it's turnip greens or annual ryegrass or whatever it is, clover, that thing that you're growing, as soon as it gets maybe right before flowering stage, you can plow those things under, and those green manures become materials that the microorganisms are consuming and turning into something more fertile. The beauty of all these materials is that they can be found or manufactured right on the farm. What a wonderful thing that is. Now, if you want to go a little deeper into this subject, I've got another video on preparing a new garden bed that you're going to want to see. I'll have the link here at the end of the video and in the description below. I think you'll enjoy it. It has a lot to do with what we're talking about, and many of you find yourself in a position where you want to prepare a brand new garden plot on an otherwise undeveloped section of your yard or its field and it's never been planted before. How do you go about preparing that? A lot of what we talked about today, but you'll want to watch that video. It goes into a little more depth, if you will. Now, if you have a question or a comment about today's subject, maybe you have another gardening question, think. What do we want to talk about? And put it in the comment section below. If it's a good question and I think many people will benefit from it, we'll cover it in another Farmhands Companion question and answer show. Until next time, I'm Paul Mack, and I'll talk at you later. Did you see that wasp?